Why did a silent girl finally speak, when her bunny disappeared? A tale of loss and healing. Have you ever wondered what could be more cruel than death itself? It's when a newborn soul enters the world, only to be buried alive in the burning sand by the very person whose blood it shares as if it never existed. The scorching midday sun cracked the earth. The wind carried no relief, only flinging searing sand into the air, painting everything in a pale shroud of death. In the distance, the steady drone of an engine pulsed like the cold heartbeat of a monster. A silver car cut across the wavy dunes, silent and swift, carrying something darker than night, a decision forged in cruelty. The car stopped abruptly. A man in a gray suit stepped out, as if attending a high-level conference. His face was void of emotion, pale skin contrasted with the shadow descending over his soul. In his hands was a thin bundle of cloth. Inside, a fragile, squirming form. A newborn. Red and raw, eyes still shut yet to see the sun. He laid the bundle on the sand. The baby began to cry, its weak, panicked wails like a soul sensing an unspeakable doom. But the cries couldn't penetrate the frozen shell around the father's heart. His hand, pale and trembling, began to dig. Not a grave for the dead but a denial of life. A living man burying a living being, revoking its right to exist. He dug a shallow hole. Not deep enough to hide guilt, just enough to rationalize it. He placed the baby in, still crying, and began covering it with sand. Grain by grain, it clung to the baby's skin, entered its nose and ears. Layer after layer. He left the dirt-streaked face exposed as if letting nature finish what he began. In that moment, the wind fell eerily still. The entire universe seemed to hold its breath. Then something strange happened. The man paused. His eyes flickered. Looking at the curled-up infant, eyes barely cracked open in a desperate plea, his cold facade trembled. But only for a second. He tightened his collar, turned his back. No words. No tears. He walked briskly to the car. The engine roared, the car turned, and disappeared into a sandstorm. All that remained was the wind, the burning sun, and a fading cry growing weaker by the second. Time stretched unbearably. The sun bore down without mercy. Hot grains burned the baby's skin, turning it crimson. The cries slowed to faint gasps. The pain no longer caused tears, just exhaustion. Too tired to fight, too tired to hope. But in a desert where all faith has died, could a miracle still exist? Do you believe animals can sense life and death? That sometimes the purest spirits don't take human form but emerge instead as a white horse against a sea of dunes? At the edge of the desert, in a small ranch under the sweltering afternoon sun, a snow-white mare stood silently. Her mane fluttered like silver mist, but her upright ears and anxious eyes revealed a stirring inside her. Her name was Estrella, given by her aging owner for her star-like eyes and pristine coat. Estrella had lived here for nearly a decade. She had survived droughts, floods, and once even found her way home after being lost in the woods. But today, something else called to her, a sound not heard with ears, but felt in the heart. She didn't understand what she was sensing. Only that her heartbeat surged and her body grew restless, as though a soul was whispering for help. She lifted her head toward the dunes. Wind, sand, and death lay beyond, but without hesitation, Estrella slammed her hooves into the wooden gate. The planks splintered. Then, like a white bolt of lightning, she galloped forward without looking back. Through dust fields, over fences, and into the drifting sands she ran. She didn't know where. She just knew she had to go. Somewhere, a life was slipping away, second by second. No command. No rider. only the call of compassion like a temple bell ringing through hell. The ranch hand screamed when he saw she'd escaped, but his voice was swallowed by wind. Estrella, possessed by purpose, ran faster than she ever had before. Each gallop kicked up clouds of blazing sand. The desert roared beneath her hooves like angry spirits trying to halt her. But nothing could stop a heart carrying a mission. The sun began to dip. Meanwhile, the newborn whose name we still do not know had fallen silent. Lips cracked, eyes sealed, chest rising in fragile spasms like a leaf in a storm. A desert mosquito landed on the baby's cheek, but it lacked the strength to brush it away. Nature, once beautiful, had become merciless. Then came a shift in the wind. It blew from the direction Estrella was charging in. Moments later, a white figure appeared atop a dune, chest heaving, nostrils flaring, eyes wide, sniffing the air. She stopped. Something was off. Not the scent of death but of life. Faint. Fragile. But still there. Carefully, she descended the dune. In the golden blaze of sunset, she found a shallow pit. A face smeared in dirt, lips trembling, eyes half open, still holding onto a last sliver of hope. Estrella lowered her head, nearly touching the child. A breath, barely a whisper, brushed her nose. But it was enough to wrench her heart. With massive but careful hooves, she gently brushed away the sand. She didn't step on the child. Somehow, she knew that even the tiniest mistake could mean death. As she cleared the sand, the baby's full form emerged. Thin. Sunburnt. One tiny hand stretched out involuntarily. Estrella touched it with her nose. The hand curled weakly, clutching hope. And in that moment, the wind howled louder, as if nature itself awakened. This was a miracle. And Estrella, not a god, not a human but a horse with a feeling heart, was its messenger. Estrella knew. Somehow, she knew time was running out. The child wasn't dying from fate but from a choice made by a human to take away its right to live. Lowering her head, Estrella gently took the edge of the cloth with her teeth. The fabric was torn, covered in dust and dried blood. She didn't flinch. She turned, raised her head, and began walking, carrying the child in her mouth. No command. No guide. Just one sacred instinct: compassion. The wind howled violently, sand lashed at her face and coat. Under the deepening sky, nothing remained but nameless dunes and hoof prints marking a race for life. Each step was a prayer. A heartbeat offered to hope. The baby no longer cried. Eyes shut, lips cracked, breath as faint as wind brushing petals, but still alive. That was all Estrella needed to keep going. She avoided a deep sand trench where others had once sunk and died. Instead, she took the longer, safer route, because one wrong step wouldn't cost her life, but that of the soul she carried. At a small hut at the desert's edge, the sun had nearly vanished. The wind shifted, carrying hints of moisture. A rare rainstorm was forming. Maria Socorro, a woman with weathered eyes and gardener's hands, sat chopping wood. She sensed a strange wind, colder than usual, as if the sky whispered a secret. Jose, her husband, was stoking the fire for tea. They had no children. They had wept for years, waiting for the sound of a baby's cry that never came. Yet they never cursed life. They simply lived quietly, like desert dust. Until they heard hooves. Maria looked up, heart pounding. Estrella, her neighbor's white horse, emerged like a ghost in the dusk. But what made her voice crack wasn't the horse, it was what it carried. A thin cloth bundle. Stained red. Moving. Jose, she shouted. He dropped his stick and ran to the door. And in his wide eyes appeared the shadow of a miracle. Estrella stopped at the doorstep, laid the bundle down, and stepped back. Her eyes held no fear, only calm, as if saying, "My part is done." Jose fell to his knees and opened the cloth. They were speechless. A baby. Red, hot as coal, breathing erratically, heartbeat wild. A bruise on the forehead. Dried blood and sand on the skin. But the eyes, those eyes opened and looked at them, calling for Mama. Papa, for a love never known. Jose trembled, lifting the child. Dear God, how could someone? Maria didn't cry. She sprang into action, warming water, grabbing clean cloths, picking aloe leaves from the garden, mixing medicine. She moved like a mother of 100 children, though she had never been one. But her heart, from that moment, was no longer empty. Rain began to fall on the old thatched roof, soft taps, like heaven knocking gently. A life had just been saved. Maria had no answers. Only the feeling that, cradling this child, her old world, its silence, dust, and cold nights vanished, replaced by a tremble she'd never known. The baby rescued from death's mouth now stirred in her arms. A fragile cry rose, thin as thread between life and death. And that thread made Maria weep for real. Jose, he's alive, she whispered, cradling the burning little body against her chest, as if to give it all her strength. Jose sat in stunned silence. He had seen many things but never felt so powerless. The baby's burns, cracked lips, shallow breath, they screamed of the cruelty someone had inflicted. Who could do this to a child? We have to do something, he murmured. Maria nodded quietly. She took warm water, gently wiped the dirt and blood away. Each touch made the child flinch, and her heart clenched tighter. Don't be afraid. Mama's here. No one will hurt you now, she whispered, not knowing when her mouth had started calling herself Mama. Estrella stood silently at the door, soaked in rain. The rare storm had arrived, blessing the parched earth. The rain fell but could not cool the warmth swelling in that little hut, a fire lit by love. Jose stoked the fire. Maria crushed aloe leaves, mixing in coconut oil and honey, folk remedies passed down from her mother. Maybe not the best, but all she had to offer to a soul no one wanted. After the medicine and drying, the baby was placed in a soft wool-lined basket. Eyes slightly open, staring at Maria, curious and deep. Under the flickering oil lamp, those eyes lit the long dark home. This child feels heaven sent, Jose whispered. No one found him. No one heard his cry. Only Estrella. Do you think that means something? Maria looked to the window, where Estrella still stood, watching. I think, she knew. She was chosen. Like a messenger. Outside, the rain fell harder. But inside the little desert hut, a miracle had quietly taken root. Not from a divine hand. No thunder or lightning. Just two hearts long empty, now reignited by a single, fragile cry. Jose reached for a thick blanket, covering the basket. He whispered, "We have to name him." Maria nodded. Softly, like a prayer, she said, "Gabriel, like an angel." The child shifted, made a faint sound, a breath, but it made Maria and Jose freeze in awe. She held her chest, tears falling silently. He turned away, adding another log to the fire. No more words were needed. They both knew. From tonight on, this home no longer belonged to two lonely elders. It was now a sanctuary. A family. And everything else was only just beginning. The rain had just stopped. Faint moonlight shone on the thatched roof, still dripping with water. Inside the wool-lined basket, baby Gabriel slept peacefully, as if he had never been buried under the shadows of death. But while the soft light of the cramped kitchen flickered gently, outside, a murmur had already begun to ripple, spreading slowly, one whisper at a time. Early the next morning, Jose put on his hat and headed to the village market. He brought along a basket of hand-embroidered goods Maria had made months earlier. They usually didn't sell, but today, he needed an excuse to leave, not to sell, but to listen. Ever since Estrella brought Gabriel home, something in his heart warned him, this would not be easy. And his instinct was right. The rumors had begun. "Hey Jose, did you hear? Someone saw a strange car driving through the desert yesterday, near the Western Burial Rocks. They said there were footprints, and the sound of a crying baby. But nobody was there." Jose held his breath, trying to sound casual. "Probably just a fox's howl, fellas. The desert echoes all sorts of sounds. Last time we thought someone was crying for help, turned out it was a bat." Laughter erupted, but inside, Jose felt cold. A crying baby in the desert. That rumor didn't need 3 days to set the whole village ablaze. Before noon, more news spread. They say that luxury car had a capital city plate. Some rich guys looking for a missing child. Word is, the baby wasn't lost, it was thrown away. Heard it's an illegitimate child. Rumors bred like mushrooms after rain. And in a remote village, the most dangerous thing wasn't hunger, it was gossip. When Jose returned home, he carried some flatbread, a bag of beans, and a heart heavy with worry. Maria met him with questioning eyes. No words were needed, her look said it all, "We're being watched." Meanwhile, Estrella, the strange white horse, still hadn't left their home. Even when her old owner came calling, she didn't budge. Even when fresh grass was placed before her, she stood still like a guardian statue. And oddly, Gabriel, ever since he had woken up, only seemed truly calm when he heard the sound of hooves on the earthen yard. Sometimes, when he cried, the familiar snort from outside the door was enough to soothe him, as if by magic. "Do you think we should leave this place?" Maria asked, eyes never leaving the sleeping Gabriel. Jose didn't answer right away. He sighed and said, "No. But we need to be ready for anything." That night, they built a small space beneath the floorboards lined with soft fabric, dry grass, and a thin blanket, just enough to hide a child. Not out of deceit, but because their instincts screamed, someone was coming. And he wasn't coming to reclaim his blood, he was coming to bury the evidence. At dawn the next morning, just as Maria finished steeping tea, hoofbeats echoed, not Estrella's this time, but someone else's from the end of the dirt path. 2 men on horseback appeared. One wore a long gray coat. The other walked behind, serious-faced, with a weapon at his side. Maria clutched her husband's sleeve. Jose stepped outside, trying to keep his voice steady. "Morning, gentlemen. What brings you here?" The man in front, the local sheriff, Teodoro, locked eyes with him. "We're investigating a missing child. A witness claims to have seen a white horse carrying a cloth bundle out of the desert last night, heading straight to your home." For a split second, Jose's heart stopped. But he merely chuckled softly. "That horse, Estrella. She's not mine. She came here when it rained hard. Maybe she was hurt and just needed shelter. But I don't know anything about a child." Inside, Maria clutched Gabriel tighter. Outside, Estrella stood still as stone, eyes locked on the officer, watchful, unblinking. Teodoro frowned. "We'll be back. But remember, concealing a missing child is a crime." They left, slicing the air with silence. Maria turned inside, pale as a ghost but tearless. "Jose, they know. They just don't have proof yet." He gripped her hand tightly. They didn't speak. Only one thought echoed in both their minds. "We must protect Gabriel at any cost." 3 days after Sheriff Teodoro's visit, a sleek black car with a capital license plate rolled down the dirt road into the village. No one knew who was inside. No one dared approach. But the clouds of red dust it kicked up felt like an omen. At the small home on the edge of the desert, Jose was mending the fence when Estrella suddenly lifted her head. She snorted, stepped slowly toward the gate, eyes sharp like blades. Inside, Maria was feeding Gabriel from a bottle. He was stronger now, cheeks rosy, smiling occasionally like nothing in the world could harm him. But she knew this peace would not last. The car stopped in front of the yard. A man in a black suit stepped out. Cold eyes. Chiseled features. A square jaw full of arrogance. 2 large bodyguards stood behind him like stone statues. Sheriff Teodoro followed, visibly uncomfortable but powerless to intervene. "Good day," the man said. His voice was deep, clear, condescending. "You're Jose, correct?" Jose nodded, gripping the fence post like it might become a weapon. "We heard, a white horse came here. And brought a gift." Maria stepped out with Gabriel in her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, his head resting on her shoulder. Her eyes met the man's, a clash of fire and ice. "That is, my son," he said. Maria tightened her grip. "If he's your son, why was he left in the desert like garbage?" The man's brow twitched, but his tone stayed calm. "I admit, a mistake was made. I've come to correct it." "With bodyguards?" Jose snapped. "Or with power, to take from us again?" Sheriff Teodoro coughed awkwardly, trying to de-escalate. "Mr. Ricardo, perhaps we can speak more civilly." Ricardo Mendez, the name struck like lightning. One of the capital's most powerful businessmen. Wealthy. Cold. Untouchable. And now, standing at the door of 2 poor elders trying to reclaim a child he had once buried in the sand. "We won't let this child fall into the hands of someone who tried to kill him," Maria said firmly, her voice like stone striking stone. Ricardo laughed dryly. "You think you can raise him? With what? Firewood and well water? You have no idea what world this boy belongs to. I am his father." "Father?" Maria gritted her teeth. "A father doesn't leave his child to die in scorching sand. A father doesn't bury him like a nameless corpse. You're not a father, you're a beast with a business card." The air turned thick. Estrella stomped forward, hooves cracking the ground, stepping between Ricardo and the door. Teodoro's hand moved to his holster. The bodyguards tensed. Jose laid a hand on Estrella. "Not now, girl, but if they step any closer." Gabriel began to cry. The sound shattered the tension. Maria rushed inside, humming a lullaby. But Ricardo didn't back off. He followed, ready to enter. Estrella blocked him, eyes blazing. "Stop," Jose said, voice like a hammer. "You'll walk over my dead body first." Suddenly, Teodoro raised his voice, firm. "Mr. Ricardo, you say you're the father. But under the law, you need a birth certificate. DNA evidence. Until then, you have no legal right." and I uphold the law here." Ricardo stared at him, fuming. "Then I'll use the law. I'll take this to court. I'll make them crawl before me. I am Ricardo Mendez." Jose calmly spat on the ground. "So what? To us, you're just a man who tried to kill his own child." No one spoke. Ricardo turned and left. But his final look wasn't one of defeat, it was a predator's glare. He wasn't done. The car drove off, trailing dust and a promise like a blade. "I'll be back. And when I return, you'll have nowhere left to hide." News spread faster than dry season winds after the first rain. Within half an hour of the black car leaving, at least 3 grocery stalls and 5 homes knew who had arrived. Ricardo Mendez, the billionaire so powerful he didn't need laws, just his name. In the village market, housewives whispered. At the small tavern, men furrowed their brows. "That guy's the father. What kind of father throws his kid into the desert? There's gotta be more to this." The only person who said nothing was Dona Sifa, the village's most notorious gossip. But this time, she traded talk for action. That afternoon, she wore her wide-brimmed hat and carried a basket of pastries to Jose and Maria's home. Not to greet them but to observe. Estrella still stood at the doorstep, watching her curiously. When she set down the basket, the white horse gave a slow nod, almost like she was sizing up an ally. Maria stepped out, Gabriel in her arms. Dona Sifa looked at the baby, then at the silver-haired woman. No words. Just wind rustling the banana trees behind the house. The old woman finally spoke. "I once had a baby boy. He died at 3 months from malaria. I had no medicine. No money. But I held him with bare hands until his last breath." Maria squeezed Gabriel gently, voice trembling. "This baby almost died too. But heaven didn't take him." Dona Sifa nodded slowly. "As for that man Ricardo, I've seen him on TV. Lavish wedding with a minister's daughter. Built a charity hospital. Looks like an angel. But I heard from ex-staff, he once beat a maid until she miscarried. And nothing happened to him." Jose stepped out, his face heavy. "Then we have even more reason to keep Gabriel. We can't give this child back. We won't." Sifa pressed her lips. "But, if it's just the 2 of you, he'll crush you without blinking. But if the whole village knows, if the whole district knows, if the media knows, it's a different story." Jose raised an eyebrow. "You mean?" Dona Sifa smiled. "I'll spread the word. You just keep that baby safe. And if anyone strange comes near, I'll be the first to sound the alarm." That night, an unofficial meeting took place in the village headman's yard. No invitations. No banners. Just wooden stools, the hum of oil lamps, and a group of people finally waking up. They debated. They argued. But more importantly, they listened. An old vegetable seller said, "Once, a big landowner forced me to sell my field for dirt cheap. He drove the same black car." A mother of 3 added, "If Estrella hadn't found that baby, he'd be sand now." A 12-year-old boy sitting in the back whispered, "Miss Maria is the kindest in town. If she raises that baby, he'll grow up good." No one declared war on Ricardo Mendez. No one made heroic speeches to defend Jose or Maria. But the way people began to question, began to care, began to share the story. That was the seed of a collective resistance. The next morning, when Ricardo's men returned to pressure the sheriff into filing an official missing child report, he was surprised to find no one spoke. No one guided. No one cooperated. Even the children watched him with cautious eyes like he was darkness disguised as a man. In a corner of the village hall, a photo had been hung. Not of Ricardo but of baby Gabriel, smiling beside Estrella. Beneath it, someone had scribbled in charcoal, "We don't protect this child because of who he is. We protect him because he deserves to be loved." Do you believe that truth, no matter how deeply buried under money, lies, and power, will eventually leak out? Like water seeping through stone, silently and persistently, until one day, it bursts through the dam of deception once thought indestructible. On the seventh morning since Gabriel entered Jose and Maria's life, something unexpected happened. A young man with a scholarly look and a worn-out backpack stepped off a dusty bus at the edge of the village. He had no camera, no microphone, no press credentials. But his eyes, cool, sharp, commanded quiet attention. "Excuse me," he asked, "is this the place where a child was found in the desert?" The tea shop lady avoided his gaze but didn't deny it. She simply glanced toward the far end of the village where a small mud house stood alone in a field. The young man nodded. He had the confirmation he needed. His name was Samuel, a freelance journalist who had once written for major newspapers but left after an expose he authored was buried by his own editors for targeting powerful people. "I don't write for money. I write so the truth can breathe," Samuel reminded himself every time he prepared to unveil a hidden story. When Samuel arrived at Jose and Maria's home, the couple was cautious. They'd had enough of visitors who took stories and left them behind to face the storm alone. But Samuel's eyes weren't like the others. They held no ambition, no agenda, only a blazing hunger to uncover the core of darkness. "I won't promise you'll win in court," Samuel said bluntly. "But I promise this people will know what happened to Gabriel. The entire country will know. And once the truth catches fire, no one can put it out." So the story was told. Every word from Maria, every tear from Jose, every soft exhale from Estrella at the doorway Samuel recorded, not with ink, but with heart. 3 days later, on a little-known online publication titled The Quiet Voice of the Voiceless, an article was published. "The Buried Child and the Crime of Power." It opened with a sentence that stunned the nation. The man once hailed as the capital's greatest philanthropist tried to bury his own son alive in the desert. There were no photos of Jose. No names of Maria. But there was a photo of Estrella, the mist-colored white horse, staring steadfastly at a small basket wrapped in a pale blue cloth. And the story spread. First through independent journalist networks. Then through child advocacy forums. Then international news platforms. Within 48 hours, the story had over 3 million views, 50,000 plus comments, and became the most talked about topic on social media nationwide. Then, one comment stunned everyone. "This is my child." A young woman posted a photo of herself pregnant from a year ago. Her name was Elena, a former maid at Ricardo Mendez's mansion who disappeared right after giving birth. She was Gabriel's biological mother. Overnight, Ricardo Mendez, once the face of charity hospitals, college scholarships, and business summits, became the national symbol of cruelty, hypocrisy, and inhumanity. A wave of public outrage erupted. This was no longer just a village affair. It was now a national reckoning against those who thought they could buy silence. Meanwhile, in the tiny house where Gabriel still slept peacefully under Maria's hand-woven blanket, Jose read the article by candlelight slowly, line by line. He said nothing. Just placed a hand on Gabriel's forehead and whispered, "Son, the truth is finding its way home." As Samuel's article went viral, it didn't just expose Ricardo Mendez, it opened a door for Elena, Gabriel's mother. She had lived like a ghost for nearly a year, hiding under a false name, working at a farm in the neighboring state, constantly afraid of being discovered. But now, light had found her, and she didn't want to hide anymore. That afternoon, a beat-up truck stopped at Jose's gate. A thin woman stepped out, sun-kissed skin, hair tied in haste, and eyes, the eyes of a mother who had cried so long, she no longer feared anything. Sheriff Teodoro escorted her personally. He nodded at Jose, a signal that said, "Trust her." Maria carried Gabriel to the porch. The baby was healthier, rosy-cheeked, beaming as Estrella snorted beside him. Elena stood frozen. Her trembling fingers ached to run and hold her son, but she didn't. She knew Gabriel wouldn't remember her. To him, Maria was the only mother he'd ever known. Maria approached, looking at the young woman with understanding. There was no jealousy. No competition. Just shared pain of mothers who had once lost everything. "You're Elena?" Maria asked gently. The girl nodded. "Yes, my son. Gabriel." That name left her lips like a prayer, mending the torn thread of her heart. "Come inside. The three of us need to talk," Jose said, breaking the silence. Inside the mud-walled home, there were no accusations. Only truths, slowly shed like soaked coats in the rain. Elena told everything. About her relationship with Ricardo while working as a maid. About being tricked into giving birth at a private clinic, then discarded. About never even holding her baby once. Maria listened quietly, her eyes moist but judgment-free. "To be a mother, and have your child stolen hurts more than death," she whispered, placing a hand on Elena's shoulder. Gabriel played on the floor with a wooden car Jose had carved. He hadn't noticed the stranger yet. But when Elena knelt close, her breath trembling, she whispered, "Gabriel, it's Mama." The boy looked up blankly. Elena gave a soft, bittersweet smile. "That's okay, you don't have to recognize me yet," she murmured. "As long as I know, you're safe." That night, Jose sat on the porch. Estrella rested her head near his feet as always. He lit his first cigarette in years. Maria stepped out quietly. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I think God gave us the chance to raise Gabriel," he replied. "But he also couldn't bear to keep him from the mother who bore him. Do you think we can share this love?" Maria asked softly. Jose turned to her not with words, but by taking her hand, and squeezing it tightly. Inside the house, Elena had fallen asleep beside Gabriel. The candlelight flickered over their faces. Gabriel, still deep in sleep, had reached out with one tiny hand and held hers. A fragile bond, beginning to heal. After Elena returned and after news swamped every newspaper, Ricardo Mendez was no longer the ghost ruling a city. He had become a crumbling figure clinging to the final scraps of his reputation. He was summoned urgently to the Federal Investigation Bureau. He denied all charges until one key piece surfaced. A handwritten letter Elena had hidden for months. A letter, in his own handwriting, begging her to abort the baby to protect the family's name. With evidence revealed, words became meaningless. But what no one expected, was that he would return to the village. One last time. That evening, dark storm clouds gathered. Estrella stomped restlessly on the dry earth. The whole village held its breath. Gabriel napped peacefully in Maria's arms. Elena hung clothes to dry. Jose, sensing something, sat by the door clutching a hoe. A worn-out car stopped at the gate. Not a luxury vehicle. No bodyguards. Just Ricardo, no suit, no polish. He was thin, hair graying, eyes sunken, and his face, hauntingly unfamiliar. "What are you doing here?" Jose asked coldly, not letting go of the hoe. Ricardo swallowed. "I have no defense. I need to see him. One last time." Maria stepped out. Elena followed. Gabriel was placed gently onto Estrella's back where the white horse lay like a silent guardian. Ricardo looked at the child, eyes glassy, then dropped his gaze. "I wasn't brave enough to be a father. I was scared he'd destroy the image I built. But I didn't know that he was the one thing worth keeping." A gust of wind blew the scent of rain in the air. No one spoke. Elena looked at the man who once took everything from her, steady-eyed. "You once called me a stain. A burden. Something to erase. But now, that thing lives, laughs, and is loved by people you could never understand." Ricardo bowed his head. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. But, if one day he asks about his father, please don't tell him only the worst." Maria stepped forward. "If you truly want redemption, don't let someone else teach him. You must be the one. Show him that remorse is the first step to becoming human again." Tears welled in Ricardo's eyes. But as he stepped toward Gabriel, Estrella sprang up. Her eyes flashed a warning. No one commanded her, she just knew. This man had buried the child once. Until he was worthy, he would not come close. Gabriel, unaware, giggled joyfully. That pure sound, untouched by the world, struck deep into Ricardo's decayed heart. He stepped back. "I can't approach him. I'm not worthy." He turned to leave. Rain began to fall, cold and sharp. But this time, no one chased him. No one held him back. Conscience is a sentence only the self can serve. That night, as everyone gathered around the oil lamp, Gabriel fell asleep holding Estrella's neck. Elena sighed. "He won't come back." Jose replied, "He didn't come to take the boy. He came to see the one thing money can't buy, unconditional love." Maria nodded. "For him, that may be the harshest sentence of all. A sentence of the soul has no court date. It lingers in every breath, every restless night, every glance from the child he once discarded, but who now lives as proof that love can bloom even on the ashes of sin." After that final encounter with Ricardo Mendez, it seemed like peace had returned to the small village. But Jose, Maria, Elena, and even Gabriel knew the storm wasn't over. That was only the battle of conscience. The legal battle in court, in public, in the system still lay ahead. And then, it came. An official notice arrived from the city family court. Both parties were summoned to appear and determine the legal guardianship of Gabriel, a child with no birth certificate, never legally recognized. Ricardo's legal team stated plainly, "Though our client made past mistakes, as the biological father, he has the right to request custody. With wealth, reputation, and stable living conditions, all odds favor our client." The village was shaken. At the small mud house, Jose clenched the letter, jaw tight. Again, it's money trying to speak over truth. Maria held Gabriel, silent tears falling. Elena sat beside them, no longer afraid, only resolute. "No. Not this time. My son is not a prize. And I, the mother who once lost him, will stand in that courtroom and make sure no one touches him again." On the day of the hearing, the sky was dry. But everyone's hearts were drenched in anxiety. The courtroom was packed. Reporters crammed in. Villagers filled the benches, simple faces sitting beside tailored suits. Elena wore a plain white blouse. Maria wore an old brown dress, hair neatly done. They held hands. And Gabriel, seated between his two mothers, held both their hands. That image stirred something in the room. Even the silver-haired judge, who had ruled over hundreds of custody cases, paused for a long moment to take it in. The trial began with the formal charges against Ricardo Mendez. Attempted infanticide, abuse of custodial power, falsification of a birth certificate, abuse of influence, and intentional concealment of a serious crime. Ricardo's seasoned attorney argued that his client was deeply remorseful and wished to make amends by formally reclaiming his child. That argument fell flat the moment Elena stood, eyes red but without a single tear. The man who forced me out of the maternity ward, the man who once called this child a disgrace, now wants to snatch him away from the very people who saved his life. Your Honor, where is the limit to shamelessness? Then Maria took the stand. She didn't use fancy words. She simply told the truth. We found him buried in the sand. If not for Estrella, he would have died. We don't have money. We don't live in a mansion. But we have something that man never had: unconditional love. The courtroom fell into silence. Ricardo said nothing. When Gabriel was taken into a private room for a psychological evaluation, he gave a surprising answer to the specialist. I have two moms. One mom at home and one mom with long hair. I don't want to leave either. 3 days later, the verdict was delivered. The judge's voice was calm but firm. Based on the child's emotional well-being, living environment, the severity of criminal acts, and the child's expressed will, this court grants legal guardianship to Ms. Elena Rodriguez, with shared custody rights alongside Mr. and Mrs. Jose and Maria Mendoza. As for Mr. Ricardo Mendez, he is hereby stripped of all parental rights, prohibited from any unsupervised contact, and will face criminal prosecution. No one said a word. Only Gabriel clapped his hands joyfully. Mama Elena. Mama Maria. Let's go home. As they left the courthouse, a swarm of reporters rushed in. Elena, how do you feel right now? She simply smiled, holding Gabriel in her arms. We didn't win anything. We just kept something that was almost lost, a life worth living. Maria took Jose's hand and whispered. This wasn't a victory over Ricardo. This was the restoration of justice. Estrella, waiting patiently in the parking lot, let out a loud snort, as if exhaling for the entire story that had finally come full circle. Have you ever witnessed a beginning that once seemed impossible? A child who was nearly buried alive, now with 3 heads bowed over him, 3 hands to catch him when he stumbles, and 3 hearts that beat with joy at every tiny laugh. The court had ruled. Justice had spoken. But for Jose, Maria, and Elena, what followed were the real days that mattered. No more threats to take Gabriel away. No more battles over who deserved his love. Now, 3 people from 3 generations, 3 ways of life, had to learn how to become a family. That morning, Gabriel woke up in a small bed by the window. He stretched, grinned, and called out, Mama Elena. Mama Maria. I'm hungry. Both women, one young, one silver-haired, entered at the same time, laughing when their eyes met. They didn't need to say it out loud. This wasn't a contest over who was the real mother. This was a shared journey of motherhood. Jose had already been up since dawn, tilling soil for a new vegetable garden. He knew a new chapter of life had begun, and he wasn't going to sleepwalk through it. That evening, as they gathered for dinner, Jose asked gently, "Elena, are you planning to stay here permanently?" She hesitated. "The farm from the next state offered me a manager position. A small house, near a school, near a market." Maria looked at her. "But I don't want to take Gabriel away from you both." Silence. Then Jose set down his bowl. "Then let's move with you." Everyone froze. "Move with me?" Elena blinked. "Well, why should we live apart?" Jose smiled. "We can sell this land. Maria, me, and Gabriel, we're family now, aren't we?" That was the first time Elena hugged Jose. A hug from a daughter who never had a father. And a father who never had a daughter of his own. Just 1 month later, a small yellow house next to the new farm was finished. Elena and Gabriel lived there. Jose and Maria built a wooden cottage right beside it. Every morning, Gabriel ran barefoot from Elena's to Jose's, shouting joyfully, "Grandpa! Grandma! I'm here for breakfast." Maria replanted her beloved chrysanthemums. Jose taught Gabriel how to water plants, harvest vegetables. Elena worked in the farm's office and took evening accounting classes. This new life wasn't glamorous, but it was full of gentle color. One day, Gabriel ran into the house with a piece of colored paper. "Mama Maria! Mama Elena! Look what I drew." On the page were 3 figures holding hands. One old, one young, and one tiny one in the middle. "Who are they?" Maria asked. "That's our family." Gabriel grinned. "This is Mama Maria, this is Mama Elena, and this." He pointed to the corner of the page. "This is Estrella. She's part of our home too." Maria burst into tears. Elena laughed, her own eyes glistening. That night, they celebrated a special occasion. Gabriel's true birthday. The day Elena gave birth to him in the hospital, before all the pain began. For the first time, all 3 sat around a small cake baked by Maria. Gabriel blew out the candle and shouted, "My wish is to stay forever with my 2 moms and grandparents." They didn't say anything. They just held hands tightly. And that was enough to know. Family isn't about blood. It's about staying when the world walks away. Far across the fields, Estrella stood quietly, gazing at the house lights. She lifted her head, took a deep breath, and gently tapped her hoof. The wind rustled through golden grass, carrying a whisper of fate. This story began in despair. But it ended in the most miraculous thing of all. A home born from unconditional love. Gabriel is now 6 years old. The curly-haired, bright-eyed boy with a radiant smile has started school near the farm. He always wears his red backpack with a white horse on it, a gift from Elena when he first learned to read the word Estrella. On his first day, Gabriel hesitated, gripping Maria's hand. "Grandma, I'm scared. What if I can't write as fast as the other kids?" Maria stroked his hair, warm as a candle in the mist. "You don't have to be the smartest in class. Just the kindest in heart." Gabriel later wrote that in his first essay. His teacher pinned it to the classboard with a note. "My grandma's words are the greatest compass of my life." At school, Gabriel wasn't the smartest. But he always shared his snacks. Let nearsighted classmates sit up front. Always said thank you when someone picked up his pencil. Even among children, love finds its way. Gabriel's teacher, Ms. Teresa, once held biases about a child raised by 3 adults. But after a few months, she understood. It's not the structure of a family that shapes a person, but the depth of its love. At home, Elena was busy at the farm, but always home by dinner. She and Gabriel did homework together each night. She told fairy tales but always included a white horse who saves lives. Jose taught Gabriel to carve wooden toys. He told stories of Mexico's past with a raspy voice that Gabriel listened to like sacred legends. "Grandpa, when I grow up, can I be a storyteller like you?" "As long as you live with kindness," Jose said, resting a calloused hand on his shoulder, "any job you choose will be beautiful." Maria baked cookies shaped like hearts. "So you'll remember," she'd say, "every day is a chance to love someone." One day, Gabriel ran in, breathless. "Mama! Grandma! The school's having an essay contest. The topic is my hero. Who should I write about?" They all looked at each other and smiled warmly. Elena asked, "Who do you think your first hero is?" Gabriel thought hard, then shouted, "Estrella." No one was surprised. On submission day, Gabriel brought a letter. It wasn't poetic, just pure. "My hero can't talk, but she can listen. She has no superpowers, but she saved me from dying. My hero is a white horse named Estrella, and I love her like I love my mom's." That letter was published in the local paper and went viral. Journalists came to interview him, but Gabriel gave only one answer. "Estrella doesn't need to be famous. She just needs to know I'll never forget the day she found me in the sand." Not long after, an esteemed agricultural university invited Elena to speak at a conference titled Animals and Emotion. They asked permission to share Estrella's story. The first horse in the region officially credited with saving a human life. Gabriel was there too. When someone asked him, "What's your biggest dream for the future?" Gabriel answered, "I hope someday I can build a place just for animals who were once abandoned like Estrella was, so they can become someone else's hero too." No one held back their tears. A child once buried beneath desert sand, now rising like a seed in the wilderness, reaching toward the world, carrying lessons no book could ever teach. That day, when they returned home, Gabriel hugged Estrella for a long time. "Grandma Maria says horses live long when they're loved. Mama Elena says you were the first light in my life. And I just want to see you at the window every morning." Estrella blinked, then gently nuzzled his cheek. Like a promise, silent, but sacred. That night, the man sat by the fire with the whole family. His name was Alberto Mendez, Ricardo's older brother, who had once left the family after refusing to accept his younger brother's hypocritical lifestyle. He had lived in exile, farming in Chile, and completely cut off all contact. It wasn't until I read the news and saw Gabriel's name, that I realized the child my brother once disowned is still alive and has grown into a symbol of love. Alberto brought with him an old leather notebook, inside of which were unsent letters written by Ricardo and Alberto's mother before she died. One of them contained a shocking truth. Ricardo wasn't my biological son. He was the child of a housemaid who was raped by your grandfather. I raised him to protect the family's honor." The room fell silent. Elena shivered. Did that mean Ricardo was a victim of the past too? Alberto continued. "This doesn't erase Ricardo's crimes, but it explains why he was so afraid of being exposed. Why he chose the cruelest way to sever all ties to the tainted blood he believed his son inherited." Jose whispered, stunned. "So, the obsession with honor has haunted 3 generations." Alberto hadn't come to claim anything. He only wanted to leave a piece of the truth so that one day, when Gabriel was older, he wouldn't have to wander blindly through lies and secrecy. The boy deserves to know where he came from, but only when he's ready. Maria gently held Elena's hand. When the time comes, we'll tell him. But we'll tell it not with bitterness but with compassion. The next day, Alberto left. He didn't ask to stay. He didn't leave an address. Before boarding the bus out of town, he said one thing to Elena. That boy has 3 mothers. And now if he ever needs it, he has an uncle too. Gabriel didn't know the full story, but he felt it. One night, he sat beside Estrella and asked, Estrella, is it true that sometimes adults don't tell us things, because they want to protect us from being sad? Estrella, of course, didn't answer. But her wise old eyes stared quietly into the moonlight, toward a sky filled with stars the light could never quite reach. Gabriel didn't push. He simply whispered, whatever my past is, I still want to be a good person. Like Mama Elena, Mama Maria, Grandpa Jose, and you. Estrella blinked. A breeze stirred, like a gentle caress from the heavens. The next day, the 6-year-old boy wrote in his journal, I don't know who my father is, but I know my mothers are the ones who hold me when I'm scared. I have a grandpa who teaches me how to be a good man. And I have a white horse who once dug through sand to save me. I don't need anything else. I just need to keep being loved. Gabriel turned 10. He was no longer the toddler trailing behind Jose watering plants, or hiding behind Maria's skirt when strangers visited. He now walked with calm steps, his eyes wiser than his age, and a heart surprisingly gentle. One day, during a life skills lesson, the teacher asked the students to present the biggest dream of my life. Many dreamed of becoming famous YouTubers, doctors, athletes. Gabriel walked to the front holding a hand-drawn board. On it, a small house, open fields, animals, and smiling children. I want to build a place called Estrella Camp. A home where abandoned children and abused animals live together and heal one another. The teacher was speechless. The classroom fell silent. Word of Gabriel's presentation spread quickly. His drawing was displayed in the principal's office. A photographer came to take his picture. An anonymous donor sent Gabriel a notebook with a message on the first page. Even the smallest ideas can plant seeds for a better world. Gabriel began sketching the layout for Estrella Camp in colored pencil. In his mind, everything was clear. Each animal shelter would have a play area for children. Each child would be given a beautiful new name. And on every wall, a sentence would be written. Here, no one is left behind. When Jose saw the sketch, he was stunned. You want to help other children, even though you were once a victim yourself? Gabriel nodded. You told me once, good people aren't those who've never been hurt. They're the ones who don't let pain turn them cruel. Maria hugged Gabriel, tears streaming down her face. Tears that hadn't dried since that very first day they found him in the sand. You've really grown up, my little angel. Elena began building a real financial plan. She picked up extra work at a veterinary center, took night classes in nonprofit management. Together, they opened a savings account with a simple name: the Estrella Dream Fund. At first, it held just a few coins. Profits from Jose's vegetables, Maria's cookie sales, and Gabriel's modest academic scholarships. But every seed takes time to sprout. One night, as they sat around the fire, Gabriel asked, If Estrella Camp really gets built, can we let anyone in, even people who used to be bad? Maria hesitated. Elena stayed quiet. Then Jose spoke. If they want to be forgiven, and you're brave enough to forgive them, then they're not bad anymore. Just lost. Gabriel smiled. He said nothing, but his eyes shone with startling clarity. Then I'll make another sign to hang at the camp gate. Everyone waited. Gabriel said, slowly, this place is open to anyone who still believes they deserve to be loved again. When everyone went to bed, only Estrella remained, standing guard by the door. Gabriel ran to her, wrapped his arms around her neck, and whispered, "Do you see, Estrella? I'm naming the place after you. Because you're the reason I'm still alive." Estrella gently nudged his forehead. An unspoken, sacred promise. Far away, the stars shimmered in the night sky. As if listening, as if recording the birth of a dream. Gabriel was 12. He still slept by the window that faced the fields where Estrella stood watch each night. Still ate Maria's breakfast. Still walked the dusty red road to school, backpack slung to one side. But the dream of Estrella Camp never left his eyes. One day, a strange letter arrived at school. The principal called Gabriel and Elena into the office. In his hand was an envelope with a gold embossed seal. National Youth Dream Program, hosted by the Trust Foundation, Capital City. The letter was an invitation. After reviewing the presentation and dream of Gabriel M., we invite him to join the Young Dreamers Conference, where 20 outstanding youths from across the country will receive training, mentorship, and financial support to realize their community projects. Elena looked at Gabriel. The boy clutched the letter, eyes shining, lips pressed tight. "Can I go, Mama?" Elena nodded. "Of course. But this time, you'll have to go alone." On departure day, the whole village came to say goodbye. Maria packed him cookies. Jose gave him a small carved wooden charm shaped like a horse. Estrella, sensing his impending absence, nudged into his shoulder and refused to move. "I'll come back," Gabriel whispered. "I'm just going to learn how to build a place that can save kids like me." The train rolled out, carrying Gabriel to the bustling capital. Tower lights replaced oil lamps. Honking horns replaced chirping crickets. People in suits and smartphones passed by. No one noticing the boy from a land where love was the native language. At the conference, Gabriel was the youngest. The others spoke fluently about financial models, operating frameworks, and digital media strategies. Gabriel stood among them silently, still hugging his colored pencil drawings of Estrella Camp. Presentation day came. He stepped on stage. No PowerPoint. No suit. No marketing slogan. He simply told his story. From the day he was buried in the sand, to the moment Estrella found him, to the first time Maria and Jose wrapped him in cloth, to the first meal, the first hand held, the first dream born. I don't want to be a superhero. I just want to be the first hand that reaches for a child and says, "You're not alone anymore." The auditorium fell silent. Not from pity, but from a truth so simple, it took everyone's breath away. 3 days later, Gabriel's name was called. He won the special grand prize. Not just seed funding for Estrella Camp, but a full-ride scholarship until adulthood. He sat in shock, clutching the award, heart swelling with emotion. No screaming. No tears. He simply called home. "Grandma, We did it. But cities aren't all good. Gabriel soon realized some organizers wanted to commercialize the Estrella Camp idea. Turn it into a profit model. Even suggested expanding it as a franchise. You should consider the bigger benefit, Gabriel. Your dream deserves to be professionalized. Gabriel looked at them and calmly asked, will those kids be loved the way my grandma loved me? Or will they become an emotional training program for VIP guests? No one answered. Gabriel bowed his head and smiled. Thank you for everything. But I've learned, not every door needs to be opened. Gabriel returned to his village. With enough support to lay the foundation for Estrella Camp, his way. He sat with Estrella and told her everything. The old horse didn't speak. But perhaps, in the silent language of loyalty, she understood. The boy who was once saved from the sand now knows how to protect his own dream. After returning from the capital, Gabriel didn't rest. Elena helped him draft a detailed construction plan. Maria oversaw meals for the workers, while Jose, despite his age, rarely left the site. His trembling hands still carried bricks and mixed cement alongside young men. I won't let my grandson build the world he dreams of all by himself, Jose said. And on a bright May morning, the groundbreaking ceremony for Estrella Camp officially began. No red carpet. No grand banners. Just a boy standing on bare ground, hugging Estrella, raising the first shovel to the sky and shouting, "We begin with love." News of the project spread fast. No one had expected something like this to grow from a patch of barren land. Students from the village volunteered. Locals came to lend hands, donate rice, offer precious hours despite harvest season. One blind grandmother brought her grandchild and handed Gabriel a faded silk scarf. "I have no money. Just this scarf I used to wrap around my son when he was alive. He's gone now, but you keep it. Wrap it around the children here when they're cold." Gabriel hugged the scarf, speechless. Each shovel of dirt, each brick laid, was a buried promise. No child here would ever have to cry alone in the dark again. The first structures were underway. A U-shaped main house to shelter the children. A large stable for rescued horses, goats, rabbits saved from slaughterhouses or abandoned by owners. A small vegetable garden out back for the children to tend themselves. And most importantly, the quiet room, a space where anyone feeling sad could sit, hug a stuffed animal, and cry. Here, crying is a right. No one will be judged for being vulnerable, Gabriel wrote in the camp's code of conduct. Estrella seemed to fully understand her role. She no longer wandered the fields freely. She stood beside the construction zone each day, waiting, watching. When the volunteer kids arrived, she let them pet her, climb onto her back, even pull a plow with Gabriel to plant the first rows of corn. "Estrella is the soul of this place," Elena said, eyes wet, watching an orphan child cry into the horse's neck. The rainy season came. Construction stalled. Cold winds blew through. Mud clung to feet. Water flooded trenches where concrete hadn't yet been poured. Gabriel shivered from the cold, hands raw from trying to save water-damaged cement bags. Maria arrived, wrapped her scarf around his neck, tears falling. "You can walk away, my child. It's okay." Gabriel looked at her. His eyes no longer a boy's. "Grandma, if you and Grandpa hadn't wrapped me in a scarf all those years ago, would I still be standing here today?" That question. It rang like a bell in the hearts of everyone who had lost hope. The next morning, the entire village returned. The elderly, the children, everyone pulled together to rebuild what had been washed away. One hand at a time. One brick at a time. The dream lived on. Then, on a warm afternoon, Gabriel placed the final brick on the quiet room's wall. He took a marker and wrote a single line. This room is for hearts once shattered. And for those who still believe they can be whole again. Estrella Camp wasn't fully finished yet. But it had begun to breathe. A living, breathing thing fed by the kindness of strangers. The first orphan girl arrived. Her name was Camila. She didn't speak. Didn't cry. Just curled up quietly in corners. Gabriel approached her, held out his hand. You don't have to trust me. But Estrella never lets anyone stay lost. Camila looked at the white horse. And for the first time in months, she nodded. When light begins to spread, darkness doesn't vanish. It retreats. Waits. And on a day that seemed most peaceful, Gabriel suddenly came face to face with the very shadow that had once tried to erase his life. The father who buried him. That day, Estrella Camp held a soft launch for its quiet room. Camila, after nearly a month in the camp, had finally smiled. Gabriel placed a hand on her shoulder, heart overflowing with quiet joy. That's when a sleek luxury car rolled up to the gate. Uninvited. Unexpected. Out stepped a gaunt man with silver hair and weary eyes. But still carrying the familiar aura of power. Ricardo Mendez. Maria froze. Jose quickly stepped in front of Gabriel. Estrella growled softly, eyes locked on the man. Ricardo raised both hands, voice trembling. I'm not here to cause harm. I just want to see my son. One last time. Gabriel said nothing. He stared directly at the man who had once buried him. Not with hate, but with the steady gaze of someone who had died and been reborn, without needing the man in front of him. Why are you here? Gabriel asked, voice low and steady, far older than his years. Ricardo lowered his head. Because I'm dying. Stage 4 liver cancer. And I can't carry this guilt into the grave. The air went still. Heavy enough to freeze the entire courtyard. Elena gripped her son's hand. You don't have to listen, Gabriel. You have every right to refuse. Gabriel shook his head gently. No, Mom. I'll listen. Not because he deserves it, but because I need to prove that the pain he caused no longer controls me. Ricardo was invited into a small meeting room. Gabriel sat across from him. Elena stood behind her son. Estrella lay at the door, head raised, eyes fixed on the barely open entrance. When I saw you on the news, at the Dreamers Conference, Ricardo began. I was overwhelmed with regret and jealousy. You're living better than I ever dared to dream. Because of others. Not because of you. Ricardo nodded bitterly. I know. I was never worthy of being your father. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to give you this. He placed a worn leather journal on the table. Gabriel opened it. Inside were letters from Elena, his birth mother. Written after she was forced to leave the city. Pages soaked in tears, begging Ricardo to keep their child. If not for love, then for blood. Gabriel gripped the book. His eyes turned red. Why did you keep this? Because I didn't have the courage to burn it. Every time I tried, I saw her face. She never left me, Gabriel. Even after I buried the child we created together. Ricardo stood and bowed deeply. I ask only one thing. When I die, Please let my ashes remain here, in the land that nearly buried you, but also gave you a second life. Let them rest in Estrella camp." Gabriel stared at him for a long time, then nodded. "Okay. But only if you promise that no one else will ever be hurt by you again." Ricardo choked. "I no longer have the strength to hurt anyone, son." Gabriel didn't respond. He walked out of the room in silence, journal in hand, eyes turned toward the darkening violet sky. A week later, Ricardo passed away in a small clinic near the village. His cremation was quiet. Only Gabriel, Elena, Jose, Maria, and an elderly monk were present. Gabriel himself scattered the ashes over a wildflower patch in Estrella's garden. Maria embraced him tightly and whispered, "You've grown so much. Not just as a survivor, but as someone who's learned how to let go." Gabriel looked at Estrella, the white horse standing still in the distance. If she had chosen to hate people, there would be no Estrella camp today. That night, Gabriel wrote this in his journal. "I forgave not to set my father free, but to set myself free. I want to live lightly, so I can carry more broken hearts into this camp." Late winter came, sharp and quiet. Estrella camp was veiled in thin morning frost. Children wore wool scarves knitted by Maria. Jose rose earlier to stoke the fires. Camila was still mostly silent, never speaking, barely a whisper. She walked everywhere with a tiny rabbit named Bong. She fed it, cleaned its bed, slept with it cradled in her arms, as if that small creature were her whole world. Gabriel never pushed her. Instead, he left little notes. "It's cold today, remember your hat. I made grilled cheese. Yours is on the table. Estrella says you need to smile or she'll pout." Camila folded each note and tucked it into her coat. Never replied. But she never threw one away. One stormy night, thunder cracked the sky. Lightning struck a eucalyptus tree near the animal shelter. Everyone ran out to check only to find part of the rabbit hutch collapsed from the wind. Camila screamed without sound, then sprinted toward it. Bong was gone. No one had ever seen Camila panic like that. She tore through the storm, barefoot in the mud, clawing the earth with frantic hands. Gabriel rushed in, pulling her back before she got lost in the dark. "Camila, listen to me. You can't find Bong in this storm. It's too dangerous." Camila jerked away, her eyes raging like a wounded animal. For the first time, tears burst forth. She pounded her fists against Gabriel's chest, not hard, but it hurt. "You promised no one would be abandoned again." The words were cracked, trembling like wind, but they struck like thunder. Elena and Maria, standing behind them, froze. Her first words, after nearly 11 months at Estrella camp, Camila had spoken. Gabriel didn't ask why now. Didn't ask why Bong was her breaking point. He just held her tightly. Let her scream. Let her cry. Let her hit him. Let her release a year's worth of silence. Estrella walked over, lowered her head and touched Camila gently, like a mother who understood. The next morning, as the sun returned, Bong was found soaked, shivering, but alive, hidden beneath a lavender bush. Camila clutched her rabbit to her chest, trembling. "I'm sorry I left you out there." She called the rabbit her sister. The entire Estrella camp felt as if it had quietly burst open. No one laughed loudly or cheered, but eyes shimmered with tears across the courtyard. Elena, overwhelmed, whispered to Gabriel. Miracles aren't something we make. They're something we wait long enough for and they come on their own. From that day on, Camila began speaking just a little. Not often. Not at length. But each word she spoke seemed to rise from deep within. Honest, slow, and worth more than silver or gold. One afternoon, she gently took Gabriel's hand and whispered, "I dreamed of my mom last night." She asked, "Is this place heaven?" Gabriel smiled. "And what did you say?" Camila looked around. At Jose sketching trees in chalk. Maria baking gingerbread. Estrella sunbathing near the children. I said, this is where she should have brought me from the start. That night, Gabriel lay under the eaves and wrote in his journal. A rainstorm can hide the rainbow. But if we let ourselves get wet long enough, the colors will come. Camila is Estrella Camp's first rainbow. And certainly, not the last. One spring morning, as Maria taught the kids to weave baskets from palm leaves, Jose worked on new stable designs. Camila chased Bong under the lavender trees. A sealed envelope arrived in Gabriel's hands. It bore the insignia of the World Children's Alliance. The bold, italicized line read, "Mr. Gabriel Mendez, founder of Estrella Camp. We are honored to invite you to become the youngest ever member of the Global Advisory Council on Children's Rights. With your lived experience, courage, and compassion, you are living proof that a dream can save an entire generation." Gabriel read it over and over. And every time, his heart beat differently. He had never dreamed of meetings in big cities. Never dreamed of appearing on television. He dreamed of one thing. That no child like Camila, no child like him would ever be left in the dark again. And perhaps, it was time to turn that dream into reality. Not just at Estrella Camp, but everywhere. That night, the whole camp gathered around the fire. Gabriel stood in the center of the circle, holding the letter high and declared, "I'm not leaving. Estrella Camp is reaching further." Estrella stood behind him, like the eternal shadow of a pure dream. Camila raised her hand. "Will you come back?" Gabriel smiled, bent down, and held her hand. The way Maria once did for him. "I'll never leave. Because Estrella Camp isn't a place. It's people like you. Like me. Like Estrella. As long as there's one child still waiting to be loved. Estrella Camp lives." On the day Gabriel left, the entire village escorted him to the train station. Elena hugged him tight. She didn't cry. But her eyes shimmered like a mother sending her son to defend something sacred. This was a war with no guns. Only stories and compassion as weapons. Before boarding, Gabriel turned to look at Estrella. Now old, yet her eyes still wise, still as deep as the desert night. "You can't come with me this time. But you're the reason I'm going." Estrella let out a soft whinny. A perfect answer. Years later, Gabriel's name became a global symbol for children's rights. He traveled from Nairobi to New York. From fishing villages in Indonesia to the cold mountains of Pakistan. Carrying his story to inspire millions of children. All over the world, Estrella Camps sprang up. From South America to Southeast Asia. From Africa to the Middle East. Not just in name, but in spirit. Places where no child is wounded by the silence of grown ups. Camila grew up. She studied psychology. Returned to Estrella Camp as a counselor. Jose passed away in his sleep. A smile still resting on his lips as the children called, "Grandpa." Maria opened a free cooking school for single mothers. Estrella was buried beneath the eucalyptus tree. A wooden plaque marked her resting place. Estrella, soul of the children who were never named. 2003 to 2029. And every year, on August 15, the day Gabriel was rescued, hundreds of camps around the world light a candle and retell the story of how it all began. The story of an abandoned boy, a brave white horse, and a family bound not by blood, but by love that never ended. Because family is not where we're born. It's where our hearts are accepted. And through love, a child once buried in the sand can become a lighthouse for the whole world. Thank you for joining us. We'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share. What did this story teach you? How might it shape the way you live or forgive? Your voice matters. Reading your reflections brings strength, healing, and inspiration to us all. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us create more stories that awaken the soul. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.